And now on BBC Radio 4, in tonight's In Touch, Peter White talks to pianist Marcelo Bratke, whom he visited at his London home a few minutes before the piano tuner arrived.
Wow. Virtuoso performance by virtuoso pianist Marcelo Bratke. And the first question I want to ask you, Marcelo, is because I've just walked up those stairs to your top flat in West London. How did you get this piano up here?
Well, it was very exciting. The whole of Pimlico were paying attention and taking pictures of this big piano going through the window, through using that, how do you say that in English? When something that pulls the instrument like a really big machine.
Hoist. Like a hoist?
Exactly.
Yeah. And so you drew a crowd, did you, getting it up here?
Exactly.
Now, I deliberately didn't introduce you as a visually impaired concert pianist because that would have begged so many questions. And we're going to come to those questions as time goes on. Can I ask you, first of all, just to tell me a bit about you, your family, your background?
I was born in Brazil. My family, they are all architects, no musicians at all in my family. My father studied the piano for 8 years in his youth, but I had no idea that he did that until he got divorced and I was around 13 years old and he bought a piano to begin playing again. He was feeling very lonely and then I just encountered this wonderful instrument in his house.
Which is quite late, isn't it, for someone to encounter the instrument that's going to earn their living for them?
Absolutely. I had no idea I was going to live with the piano or to become a musician. It was completely crazy for me.
And long before that, it had become clear that you had eye problems, although they weren't really being addressed, were they?
I was born with congenital cataract and I developed strabism very quick when I was 1 year old. And through the not corrected strabism, I developed a very strong amblyopia.
And amblyopia is really just extreme short-sightedness, really?
Yes. I don't have a central focus in the eyes. It's like a peripheral vision through all the eye. So I cannot really see anything or understand anything. My brain has no connection with the image.
You said that you had an initial operation, but they didn't go on with the operating. Can you explain why not?
Yes. I was supposed to make 2 strabism operations. When you correct completely the strabism, your brain still uses the 2 eyes. But when you don't do that, the brain forgets one of the eyes and choose one of the eyes. So even with the congenital cataract, my brain, of course, has chosen my left eye and forgot about my right eye. So this was not developed. And this is something that you can just correct until you are 5 years old. And my mother was very upset with the fact that I was suffering. And without much knowledge, she decided not to make the second operation without knowing that this would cause a very big problem.
So how did the family generally cope with the fact that you were blind? I mean, can you explain the extent to which you were limited by your sight? What could you do? What couldn't you do?
With my left eye, that was described by the ophthalmologists like an eye that could see maybe 8% of a normal vision, and the right eye, 2%, completely blind really. I was very dependent of people, but I was taught by my family to behave normally because there was nothing that medicine could do. So it became a taboo. My family didn't want me to realize I had this problem. They wanted to hide this problem from me. And in the end, I began hiding the problem to myself as well. So I created different ways of coping with it.
So you didn't go to a special school, for instance?
No, I went to a very small school because I was obviously incapable to see what was written in the blackboard. So I went to a school that had 4 students in each classroom, and I was able to learn, but not a special school, unfortunately.
You would say unfortunately now, would you?
Now, yes. When I was young, I was very proud to be normal and, acting to my family as a normal kid. I used to say, no, don't worry, I can see everything, not to make people unhappy.
And what about your playmates? What did they think?
Well, they noticed it. And my nickname was Little Blind, which was something that traumatized me a lot.
It's ironic in a way, isn't it, that your parents didn't want you to go to a special school because that they thought would, if you like, label you, and yet you were being labelled anyway by going to an ordinary school.
Exactly. Yeah. I think they did that in a good will, really. But
sure.
And also they were disappointed. I was the first child that they had, and the only man in the family as well. I had 2 sisters. And they didn't want this to make me unhappy, first of all, but they didn't realize the limitations and the suffering I would pass through my life with it. But I don't blame them at all about that.
So when you tried to do the kind of things that your friends would do, where running, jumping, playing, I don't know, we're talking Brazil, you must have played football, well, that kind of thing, what happened?
It was always a disaster, that I was the reason for laughing all over, and I used to laugh about myself as well, in order to minimize this suffering for myself. So I became part of the game, making fun of myself and following the idea of the others.
So was discovering the piano, was that a real breakthrough for you?
Yes, it was, because when my father bought this piano and I arrived at his home and he was playing this prelude of Chopin, I became fascinated with that. Went to this piano and touching the keyboards, I tried to tried to understand without any knowledge of music, and after 1 hour I was playing the first half of this prelude, and my father said, I think I need to call the teacher to see you doing that, because it's very extraordinary. I said, oh yes, call the teacher. Then the teacher came, and I learned how to play perfectly this prelude. I began having lessons, but without reading the scores, because I could not read. So this teacher tried to develop this technique that was really created by me of understanding the music by ear.
Did people make any connection at that point with your visual impairment? Because, we know there are musicians, of course, who are blind or have very poor sight, and some people like to make that connection. Was that made in your case?
Well, I used to hide that I was short-sighted and I was practically blind. I used to go to rehearsals with the score, acting as if I was reading, because I was ashamed of not having that knowledge. But in my first concert, I had just 2 pieces in my repertoire, which was that prelude of Chopin and a Bach concerto that goes like... It's the concerto in D minor. And I went to the rehearsal with this conductor, that was the biggest conductor in Brazil, and he stopped the orchestra at a point and he said, now let's repeat bar number 48. And I said, well, maestro, what's bar number 48? I just know how to play the concerto from beginning to end. Then he realized that I had a problem, He knew that I had a visual problem, but he didn't know that I was playing by ear.
And presumably there was no suggestion that you could do Braille music. I mean, I'm rather guessing that you didn't learn Braille.
No. That was a taboo that began very early with my family. I took this taboo with me as well. I used to refuse, even to myself, that I was worse than I was. I used to say, no, I can cope with it. I won't need anything like that. And to me, to learn Braille, it would be to really giving up the sensation of being normal, really.
Yeah. You became successful, you were working. At what point did trying to keep this pretense up, at what point did it become impossible?
When I turned my 30s, it began to be difficult for me to go through that process of reading note by note. So I wouldn't accept engagements with music that I was not playing. So I was, losing a lot of opportunities.
And can I, just before we get beyond this point, just explain the kind of strategies you were using to convince people or hide the fact that you were virtually blind?
You know, a lot of techniques that I used, for example, there was one that now I think it's funny, but at the time it was strange. I used to stand up after I finished at a concert, and I used to wave to the public as if I would recognize someone there, saying, "Oh, hello, you there." But of course, I didn't even know if the concert hall was full or empty.
Are there cultural reasons? I just wonder what you think lies at the root of this.
It's a very interesting question, because I just discovered the answer, to tell you the truth, when I made my operation, my surgery, and realized what it was to see properly in one of my eyes. When I went to Boston, Dr. Peter Raposa, when he examined me, he said, "Marcelo, you are legally and technically blind in this country." And the word blind was so traumatized to me that I said to my wife, "Marita, let's leave this country immediately. I won't stay here. I don't want to do the operation here because I'm not blind."
And you thought that by leaving that country, you could leave that label behind?
Exactly. It was that kind of complication psychologically that made me behave like that. I was not convinced that I was almost completely blind at all until I saw the first image after my surgery, really. I think I wanted to be part of normal life, and I was trying to hide this to myself.
Is there a slightly macho element to this?
I think, yes. Coming from Brazil, there is this problem. And let me tell you something interesting. When I arrived in London, I felt so comfortable with this city, because if you compare London to São Paulo, the facilities you have for people with visual problems here are so developed. And people with visual problems in this country are very accepted by society in comparison to Brazil. That I felt for the first time that I could relax a little bit more being in England in comparison to Brazil.